Welcome to the Heart of the Soul podcast. My name is Amana, and I'm your host. I am a wild earth mama living in the Pacific Northwest with my soul flame and our two Earthside wildlings. I have lived most of my life afraid of speaking my truth. And although the fear remains, I am choosing the path of the brave and bold, and I'm sharing my voice with the world. Here you will find personal, heartfelt stories and insights coming from my unique lens, as well as conversations with other amazing women in my web of life who have incredible wisdom and stories to share. I truly believe that there is more that unites us than divides us. Birth and death are always a part of our human experience. Please join me in the creation of the Heart of the Soul community, as together we breathe life back into storytelling and remember what it means to be wild, human, and alive. Today, I am honored to have Leisa Masters with Earthside Birth Services with me today. I first came across her on a free birth podcast and just loved what she was saying, how she was saying it, listened to the podcast multiple times, sought out her website and mentoring services, and have just really enjoyed taking in all the wisdom that she has to share and building on that with my own thoughts and awareness. And I'm just so excited to be here with you today and have you here to share your stories.
Oh, thank you, Amana. What a beautiful intro.
So yeah, would you like to share a little bit, start off by introduce yourself in whatever way feels best to you, and then maybe move into your birth story and pregnancy and motherhood journey?
Sure. I'm a woman who walks with other women and found through my own journey the importance of other mothers' wisdom and really started to emulate that in my own work. That's what I started to do. Really, first of all, in the mothering realm, and then that kind of crept into birth work. And then I basically just had a gigantic revolutionary shift into really changing the way I looked at how I worked with women, and really saw that I was working in more of an authority position, and I just felt so at odds with this idea that I could think I knew best for women. And then I also just started to see that everywhere through birth work and people that chose to get into birth work, that even where we thought we were centering women, we weren't. And so I stripped everything back to really find my place walking beside women truly, and moved much more into a mentoring and coaching role that just really sits at this time of life where we're moving into that time of pregnancy, birth, and then really mothering, and then life. So yeah, in the last couple of years, things have really, really changed for me, and it's been extraordinary. I find it actually really hard just to sum up what I do in a sentence, because it's become this real innate knowing of how to amplify women's own journeys and have them find their own right way. So
Yes. I love that I mean, sometimes some of the most important things in life, it's hard to speak about them, and like we don't always have the culture of language around these new things or new ways of doing things. And so I really honor and appreciate that it's not easy to verbalize and put into words the depth of the work that you do with women.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that they would necessarily be able to say it either, you know, and I'm often like, what do you think that I helped you with? Because it's just so actually unique and very various with the way that women choose to work with me. And so, you know, actually I'm always playing with like what to call myself. When, you know what, when I was a doula, it was easy. I was a doula. But then I just stopped resonating with that terminology, and so much of what people thought doulas did and what I thought doulas did. And so, yeah, it's become like, what even is this role that I take up? And yeah, at the moment I'm just saying I'm like offering personal coaching in the time of birth and mothering, and take from it what you will.
Yes, I love that. Would you share with us your personal journey into motherhood?
Yeah, sure. It was a really traumatic one, actually. I would say I dreamed of being a mother my whole life. I couldn't wait for the time that I would become a mother, and actually, it just really didn't happen for me. It was, I had my daughter when I was 35, actually, so it ended up being quite a long wait. It was a really happy pregnancy. I was really well. I loved it, besides the day-to-day, you know, things that happen in pregnancy of tiredness and all of that. But otherwise, I was well and happy. I I had some good positive examples of, well, I had positive examples of mothering, but not so much positive examples of birth.
Had you witnessed a birth at that time?
No,
No.
no. I chose a model of care that was the same as my sister's, because that is what was shown to me in my family. I had a friend who was having her second birth at a very similar time, and she'd chosen home birth. She most definitely knew that what I had chosen was nowhere near in line with what I was saying I wanted. So I chose private obstetric care, which models of care in Australia are possibly a little bit different to North America, but we have kind of a kind of strong public system and then a private system. And I also had a cousin who was a midwife. They both tried to share with me information about what I was choosing. And it's quite interesting. For a really, really long time, I thought neither of them were very forthright with that information. And then, gosh, maybe a couple of years ago now, I found an old email that my cousin had sent me. And I had kind of created this narrative for myself that no one had told me, no one had shared with me. And I found this email in black and white that she had laid out all the models of care and what they meant. And you know what? You know, it's not like I didn't see that email, because I remember something else she'd written in that email actually really stuck with me. And so it was really interesting for me to reflect later that, in fact, someone had tried to tell me about the type of care that I was choosing and what it would mean for me, and I didn't listen. So I think it's really interesting how we make our choices and how influenced we can be about, I mean, and this is where my work goes today, is how our socializing as children and the types of patterns of behaviors laid down in childhood, how they so strongly affect us in adulthood if we aren't conscious of them.
Yes.
And so one of the biggest learnings I had post-birth, I'll get to the birth bit shortly, was when I was, and this was all through my training, there was an expectation that we would do a reflective piece on our birth, and which was really, really hard to do given my birth was really awful and traumatic. And I really resisted and resented needing to do it and being asked to do it and being questioned and being asked for more. And it took me, I would say, years to complete that assignment. When I did, I was so ready to take responsibility for my decision-making and understand my decision-making. And that became this incredibly powerful basis for the work that I went on to do, because when I learned to take responsibility for my own choices, it didn't mean other people weren't responsible for other things in my birth, but it meant ultimately I made the decisions. And then I had to figure out why I did, because my intuition the entire time of my pregnancy, with every interaction with my care provider, was telling me that this was wrong. And I didn't listen to it. And from that, like, I can even just see in my mind's eye, like the walk down the corridor after every appointment with my partner and him just being like, so like, how come you're telling me all this stuff? And then we go in there and they don't talk about anything. And I'm like, it's okay, it'll come later. Like the excuses I made, but what I worked out, which has kind of been revolutionary to me, I guess in the last decade, has been, I was taught to stick with what I like, see things out to the end. And it was a very repetitive, strong message of my childhood. You join something, you complete it, even if you don't like it. And I know that this was at play while I was ignoring my intuition. It was like, yeah, you don't like this. You're not getting what you need. You know you're not getting what you need. You don't even like her. She doesn't listen to you. She wants to do things to you that you don't want, that you have to keep repeating that you don't want. She argues with you when you decline things, but good girls stay.
Yes. You spoke about this a little bit on The Good Enough Mother with Sophie Brock. And I'm just going to read this little quote that I have from there where you're speaking to that we're living in a culture where we actually don't grow up with the skills to advocate for ourselves, not only in birth, but also in life. And you say that women didn't have the skills and experience to actually make those independent decisions for themselves because we've been so socialized to please people, be so worried about what people think and what we do and how we act. And I feel like that is so true. And I can definitely relate to my past self being that same type of woman that was making decisions based on what other people wanted or thought I should do, or making decisions against what I wanted for myself. And it sounds like that's sort of what you're reflecting about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see it in my work as well, that where this should be the most, like the birth of a mother. I mean, it's the birth of your baby, but it's the birth of motherhood, right? So many of us are learning our hardest lessons at the time where it should be the most extraordinary for us. You know, it should be this transformational experience as we move from, well, I mean, I was an old maiden, but anyway, you know, from maiden to mother. And so, yeah, it's kind of devastating to me. And I mean, I see it on repeat. I do a lot of birth healing work with women, and you know, it's in this same kind of vein that I'm talking about here that I did for myself, in that learning what decisions, like how we're responsible for our own decision making, even when it feels like it's out of control. You know, and that hurt when I was kind of mentored through the process of this assignment by my trainer. It hurt when she pointed that out to me. I wanted to blame everybody else. And yeah, people acted terribly to me. They did things to me that was assault and abuse. But I took myself there. And the real journey for me was learning, why did I take myself there? Like, even before this, I was a strong, smart woman who spoke her mind. And yet, gosh, if there's not something we're more socialized to, it is to pander to this kind of persona of the good girl when we have our babies. And yet, we're grown women having babies. We're not little girls. Like, it's quite ridiculous, really, that we're treated like little girls who are naughty. You know?
Yeah, it's the one time when we should be like have the most like power over the situation, and yet we're disempowered over and over again on so many levels.
Yeah, and I mean, I just don't even think of it on that level of disempowerment. I think we're just basically assaulted and abused.
Well, yes.
You know, like I don't even want to use those kind of words, because I want to get to the basis of what it is that women are experiencing in the system. There are, you know, and when we talk about systems, we talk about an overarching core belief system, way of playing things out from a systemic framework. Individuals in that system can be kind, blah, blah, blah. Still all working to a system at the end of the day.
Yes.
And the job of the system is to get us through. And the way to get us through is to break us down and play to all of those socialized, like the compliancy that we've been taught, especially as women. So yeah, and I mean, I just walk straight into that. And my story is the story of hundreds and thousands of women. I wanted something, but I made really no macro decisions to get it. I was doing like microaggressions, which I think is a complete reversal of the mindset and heart you need to be in to birth and you know, let our babies out of our bodies. So I mean, I feel really frustrated by so much of the conversation around birthing within the system, about teaching women to fight for their births and say no. And it's so harmful, because it's harmful for birth. And on top of that, for the majority of women, it's not working out. So it's just gaslighting. And some women will make it through, but many, many, many don't. And I just am so tired of that discussion. And so, you know, I now openly call it out. I'm like, you know what? And this was part of the big revolutionary change that I made, is that I stopped saving women from their own decisions. If women birth in the system, they need to learn what that system is. They need to understand what they're choosing and the potential of what they're choosing. Gosh, can't even get it out. So choosing something and knowing what it is and expecting someone else to save you from it, there is no life skills in that. And so I stopped doing it. And I had very open, blunt conversations with the women I was working with. And then I said, it's okay what you choose. I don't think it's right or wrong. But if you're not in alignment of what you want and you're choosing something that is in opposition to that, you need to figure out what that might look like. And it's okay if you still choose it. Are you prepared for what it might mean? And they were some tricky, hard conversations. And some women say, I'm not prepared to choose it, and walk away. And they have unassisted births. And some women say, I'm not ready to walk away, and they choose it. And some will make it through okay. And some really, really don't. And some of the learnings from that can change their lives because because we've had the previous conversations that say this is what can happen, and then they see it play out and they're like, okay, wow, I either live my life like this, walking straight into stuff, or I change my life. And actually so many women that have had really quite awful births in the system have come out of that and changed their lives. And it is like I did, learning why I chose an abusive care provider who induced me against my wishes without my consent, led to a birth that couldn't possibly work out the way I wanted it to. It is just the story, as I said, of hundreds of thousands of women. I really just micro node to a lot of things until I knew I would eventually and they knew I would eventually give in and say yes. And I felt that the whole time, that they all just thought, why is she fighting it? Why doesn't she just give in? And they were so relieved when I gave in.
Oh,
and said yes to the things that they wanted me to say yes to. And yeah, I, of course, really, like a lot of women in that situation, end up with a cesarean. And, a really awful, probably a pretty standard one, but, really quite an awful experience. And yeah, I cried about that for 2 years. And I stopped crying when I took responsibility for my part in it.
Mm-hmm. I've heard you speak about women, and it sounds like this is what you did, where you chose a birthplace where you knew you were going to have to say no, rather than choosing the birth team or birthplace where you could say yes or yes more.
I don't think I didn't know there were birthplaces where you could say yes. I thought if you didn't want what they offered, you said no.
Right.
And
but you knew you were going to say no to some things.
Yeah, only as I learned more. The people in my life that knew about birth thought they would educate me about birth. They would throw me a great book. I'd read it. I'd be like, yeah, I was not afraid of birth. I was looking forward to birth. I thought it was amazing. And I had, and I hear women say this all the time, and I think it's beautiful. I had trust in my body. I totally believed, after I'd read what I'd read, I knew my body could do it. And I sort of look at it like holding up the ocean with your finger. Like, get real. You're walking into a system that is designed to not allow your body to do what it's meant to do. Every action they take is against that. But I didn't have that big picture view.
Right. I'm not saying that you had the awareness of it at the time, but it sounds like that was sort of the path that you walked.
Yeah. And then, and I even distinctly remember, like, I specifically didn't want to take a certain test. And I went in with all my evidence, and I wasn't having it, and I was going to explain. I walked out with that drink, And it's just so interesting. I wonder how experienced even the providers are with like, oh, they just categorize them. They're here, but they want this, and they'll say this, and I'll just use all these lines with them, and then they'll walk out saying yes. Because especially in the models of care that we have here in Australia, if you've chosen a private model, you're in this kind of threat scenario that if you don't do as you're told, they'll discontinue your care. I mean, what a gift that would have been. But of course, playing into my conditioning, imagine being told I was going to be booted out. You know, that would have been my worst nightmare of not portraying my good girl status, even though I didn't really even think that I like played into that. So, you know, and I see this all the time with the women I work with. It is like this battle of, no, I'm this type of woman. No, I'm definitely going to say no. And then I look at all the ways that they're trying to keep everybody else happy, and I'll just sit and wait for them to, you know, figure out what they're doing, and I'll ask a few questions, and then they'll get the awareness. They're like, oh, I thought I didn't play into the good girl persona, but I am, aren't I? I'm like, yeah, you really are. How does that feel? What are you going to do about that? So it's really interesting. We don't see this stuff in ourselves. And I guess that's now the kind of basis for the work that I do is women can choose whatever the heck they want. Not interested in dictating what's right or wrong to individual women. What I want to know is if they know why they're making those decisions. Because we only have our own, you know, unless we're surrounded by a whole lot of women who talk like this, we really only have our own kind of individual view. So,
yeah, we each have our own unique lens that we're coming to the birthing experience with, the life experience that we've had, how our family's been, like you said, all the conditioning that we've had. And that all plays into the ways that we approach birth and the decisions that we're making and how the ones that we feel like we can make.
Yeah. And I guess what I kind of bring to my work is this collective story of so many women working through this. And so that women, you know, sometimes it can feel quite shameful when you realize, I mean, when I realized that was the basis for my staying with someone I didn't like, admire, or trust, I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to me now that I was choosing somebody to save me just in case who I didn't trust. Like, then how would I trust them to help me if I needed it? It's like completely ludicrous, but they're the kind of gymnastics that go on in your brain when you've been led to believe you need help, you know, that you should get this help in birth, and that even though you trust birth, it's inherently dangerous. And then over here, you're playing with your childhood conditioning, and it's like this big mess. But then it feels really shameful. Like, I should have been able to figure that out. Like, I'm a smart woman, but of course I couldn't see. And so when I'm working with women and we're working through this, like, I bring also to them my story too, because it doesn't feel so lonely to know that we're all trying to walk out of and away from all of these things that are very clever at holding us back from who we want to be and what we want to choose.
Yes. So you've sort of alluded to your birth experience, but haven't directly spoken the path of your birth. Would you mind doing that a little bit?
Like the details?
Or you went in, you did not go into natural labor. You were induced or
yeah, no, well, I had a non-consensual stretch and sweep. So we don't generally have any cervical exams in pregnancy in Australia. It's just not something that happens. But my obstetrician was going away at the end of my pregnancy, and she asked if she could check my cervix because, you know, this idea that that will tell us something. But anyway, she was going away for about a week and she wanted to see if she needed to get me a backup obstetrician or whatever. And she did a quick exam, obviously couldn't feel my cervix. It was tucked up and away where it's supposed to be, and said, nope, no worries. And then I came, and that might have been around 40 weeks. And the thing is, my mum was a very long gestator. And so I had always believed that I would also be a long gestator. And so I wasn't too worried, but also I was full-term pregnant and, you know, just suffering the uncomfortableness of that. And the next week when I came in, I must have been around 41 weeks. And she did the how are you and I did the complaint. And I just remember she flipped around this calendar like so quick. And she like pointed to 2 dates where she could induce me. Oh, I can induce you here and here. And I just was like, but no, like I don't want to be induced. Like, why are you even having this discussion with me when I've clearly told you that I don't want to be induced? And so she said, oh, okay. I think she probably huffed and puffed and rolled her eyes somewhat. I also remember earlier in my pregnancy, I'd come into an appointment and she hung up the phone on someone and it's hard to remember now, but she made some comment about, oh, these women who don't want to be induced or something. And so anyway, red flags ignored. And so then she said to me, do you want me to check again to see if your cervix has changed? And I mean, not believing for a second. I mean, I'd already had the experience of the check the time before, which was very quick, almost unfeeling. And so I was like, sure, who's not curious? And, you know, believing that would be some sort of information that would be useful, which of course it isn't. And during that exam, it was incredibly painful. I jumped off the table. My partner was horrified. I still hear the snap of the glove and the comment. She said, oh, that'll get you going. Oh. And I had not a clue what the experience was. I don't remember anything past that until we were out in the hallway. I have a complete blank of that whole anything else that was discussed in there, even though I have a fairly good recountable memory. I don't remember anything from there. And I remember walking up the hallway and my partner said, what just happened? Like he was there for the previous one where nothing, you know, like it was nothing. And then this one was excruciating. And I said, I don't know. So I wasn't able to ask any questions. I just felt really violated and shocked. And I came home and I rang my cousin and I said, I don't know what happened. This is what happened. And she said, oh, she gave you a stretch and sweep. And I was like, what's that? So, you know, I think so often we have this idea that we'll be able to decline things because we'll have time to find out what they are and see if, you know, and that was always my thoughts. Okay, I know I'm working with this woman that doesn't agree with me, but I will just take my time and figure it out. Even though I have the evidence that in my pregnancy, when I tried to decline a test, I was not able to decline the test. Part of me continued to believe that it would be different in my birth. And so I guess I was like, wow, okay. And yeah, then I just had what is really common with stretch and sweeps is I started to kind of have a really disconnected contractions that would just come and go, and that really long, drawn out prodromal type labor that exhausts you and confuses you and wears down any resolve that you have about being able to stay home as long as possible to avoid them. I mean, all of these things are just like ridiculous statements anyway, because why do you go somewhere that you want to avoid them? But anyway, and that kind of, went on for days. I was really exhausted, couldn't sleep, and eventually my waters released. In hindsight, it was a hind water leak at the top. So I just had that leaking. And I had tested positive for GBS and had been advised to go into hospital for antibiotics, which I'd planned to really avoid and not do because I didn't enjoy antibiotics. But you know what? At that point, I was so done. I was exhausted. I didn't have any resolve left. I had, I was dealing with my partner's concern. We didn't really know what labor looked like. I'd already been going like this for days and trying to avoid going in. And but when my waters released, it was like this idea of relief. Oh, good, something's happening now. I can go in and then it will happen. Of course, that is not how it went. And I guess I just went in and it was like just one long classic hospital type obstetric care, constant interruptions, constant requests to insert things, do things, monitor things, and all the things that actually, other hospitals like our public hospital, for someone like me, wouldn't have done all of those things. There certainly wouldn't have been continuous monitoring on a first-time labouring woman. They wouldn't have felt that was evidence-based. I mean, they do use it, but for other kind of scenarios, certainly not for me, but private model, and no questions from me. Just like, oh, this is what they do, even though I'd done all the it's so interesting how easily you'll just play the part in that scenario because your mind is somewhere else. You are kind of producing oxytocin until they interfere with that. You are bonding. You are kind of like thinking everyone's taking care of you. It's like a really interesting place to be in. And then I also remember I'd written a birth plan, and it was quite funny at this point. I mean, one of the reasons why a lot of women get private obstetric care is for continuity of care, that you'll see the same person and they'll come to your birth. She came flapping in with the birth plan. I mean, I tried to discuss birth plans several times during my care, which had been ignored. She had a midwife working with her that I thought would be the one that I would discuss my birth plan with. When I asked about it, I remember the midwife laughing at me, like sort of throwback head cackle kind of garbage. It's just like, I know the red flags are just lining up, aren't they? And she came in waving my paper. This is the obstetrician, about me wanting a natural placental birth without the artificial oxytocin shot. So just there I am, like trying to do my thing, and she's telling me how I can't have this thing and how dangerous it is. And I actually remember really for the first time asserting, like just being so angry because I had tried to discuss this with her for so long. And then this is the time she chose to actually have a discussion. So I remember actually being really angry, and I said, you had 9 months to discuss this with me and you've chosen not to, so go away. Like, I was really angry. But I mean, again, like, it's actually not useful. So my labor just kind of really wasn't regular. I you know what? I learned a lot about how birth works, but what I didn't learn a lot about is what the interventions meant. And when I was in that vulnerable state of wanting just to move, be like, you know, have it done. You know, being told if you just have this, it'll speed it up. I didn't understand any of the I didn't actually know the downsides of it. And so I agreed. And so, yeah, I had artificial oxytocin, and I really, really didn't want an epidural. But of course, once the artificial contractions were happening, it was very strong. I just remember it just going on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And I remember not being able to sit through a single contraction, and I would stand. And I just remember so I must have gone in there about dawn, and I can't really remember now. It must have been late afternoon by this stage, and I was just exhausted. And I remember they had like one of the birth balls, and it was, I'm quite short, and it was so big. And I still remember like trying to sit on it and my little tippy toes on the ground, and I couldn't really get the balance and the kind of like the lean in so that I could rest. Everything was like standing. I was standing and sitting, and that's actually what I remember. And then I was like, I'm so tired, I just want to lie down, because even the sitting on the ball wasn't nice. And and then I remember all sorts of things. I remember worrying about like using all the hot water in the shower, and like it was crazy. It was crazy. I don't think this little brain let go once. It was like busy and full on. And anyway, and then I remember my partner went and got the obstetrician and said, you need to give her something, because I was just collapsing. I was like, but no, I'm just going to keep doing it. And I was standing and I was collapsing and I was falling over. But I was like, I just want to keep doing it. And, you know, because I'd had this idea, and you know what? He totally undermined me, and I'd never been more grateful for someone undermining me in my life, to be honest. I remember thinking, I hate you for asking them for pain relief, but I really want that pain relief right now. And I had that epidural, and in that moment, it was so peaceful, and I was actually so happy, whilst also completely unhappy and miserable. And I think by this time we'd rolled around to kind of like way late afternoon, and starting to get towards the night. And I mean, I don't remember a lot, but I think I can deduce that there was a little bit of lying going on about what was going. And I think they were just like, she'll go all night. Like, I mean, I would fight every suggestion for hours and hours and hours. And then I really am pretty sure it was like dinner time, and we were going to get this sucker done before dinner. So,
yeah, there are statistics that back up what you're saying too. So
totally. I mean, she didn't want to call at 3 a.m. when I finally said I was done, right? Because at this point, I really do believe I was gonna call it, because the only thing I could have done is just taken everything out and gone home, which I was never going to do, or else I wouldn't have been there in the first place. And there was nothing and nobody helping me to have the birth that I wanted. So it was going to end in a major intervention one way or the other, I think. And she wasn't getting out of bed for that. So yeah, the manipulation and lies, I think, is kind of pretty standard. It took me a long time to piece that together kind of afterwards as I learned more. Yeah, you know, they can get you into cesarean very, very quickly. You know, I know lots of women who wait around for many, many hours, but when they want you to be done by dinner time, they're going to get you in. I think now I recall that anaesthetist was off home, and they don't come back till morning. So unless there's a call out and all this drama, I mean, the things I know about the private system now would curl your toes. But Yeah, so I was wheeled very quickly and it happened very fast. I'm pretty sure it was done in about 20 minutes. They held up a fairly large baby and told me that was the reason why. I believed it for a while because it was easier to believe I couldn't do it than I'd made lots of really poor decisions. And yeah, it was pretty devastating. Surgery was pretty horrible. I wear glasses and they took them off me. I still feel really sad when I see women in surgery with glasses because they can see. And I'm like, oh, I remember not being able to see anything. And that was really horrible. And and it's just all the standard. They don't want to do anything that you ask. And I don't really remember it very well. I just remember crying the whole time. And then afterwards, I just remember feeling really lonely. So, yeah, just kind of started my mothering in a really shitty place, like lots of women. Breastfeeding was hard in the sense of just someone learning after a really difficult experience, instincts kind of gone. My daughter was most likely pretty dozy. Hurt, they used forceps in the cesarean. So her face was quite like tilted. Found out later, much later, through actually a client of mine who was a surgical nurse, and she mentioned that with bigger baby, she said, oh, is your baby big? And I was like, oh, yes, big-ish. And she said, oh, they do that so that they don't make the incision wider. Oh. Isn't that ghastly?
That's horrible. Horrific.
Yeah. And so, awful. Yeah, for a long time, I just thought it was like surgery choice. And then I was like, that should have been my choice. I get to decide the size of the incision on my uterus. I get to decide how my daughter, a lot of the decisions I made were to try and not have her harmed, even though cesareans have their own set of harms associated with them. But I mean, I truly believe in that environment, vaginally birthing my baby would have been disastrous, to be honest. I think for me and for her, the stories I know out of that particular hospital, and the conditions I was already under, I think it would have been incredibly dangerous. And perhaps actually, and also quite terribly, the cesarean, even though she used forceps, may have actually been a somewhat safer. Because I mean, if you're going to do that in a cesarean, imagine what you do in a vaginal birth with a woman. Yeah. Oh. I mean, the disgrace, right? So, it's so interesting being able to even look at it with this kind of critique when really I just blubbed and sobbed for years, every time I thought about it. I mean, it's still emotional. Yeah.
How did that experience and your postpartum transition into you doing birth work and mentoring women and viewing birth as a portal for life development? And yeah.
Well, I was tremendously lucky with my postpartum. My best friend, who had her baby and in a home birth at a similar time, was also a breastfeeding counselor. And so she made sure, where she probably was less, forceful around birth information, slid right in to the breastfeeding and really set me on an amazing path of understanding what was going on for me with my baby, and really made it her business to check in regularly and demystify a lot of the things that I had thought about breastfeeding. Even though I was had seen a lot of breastfeeding, was breastfed myself, and so it was very, very normalized that I would breastfeed, and I was very, very sure I would breastfeed. I was just having those sort of little challenges, not understanding that babies can feed very, very often. not understanding a uncomfortable latch versus a very bad latch. And she was able to do that all through the phone for me. And it actually probably changed my life. And I guess breastfeeding my daughter changed my life. So I might cry. I'm really grateful. She knows that. So, yeah. And then she was also able to guide me through beautiful mothering. And that really changed my life. And gave me, I guess, a sense of ownership over my experience that birth never gave me. But I absolutely never wanted to work in birth. So I was asked many, many times. So I actually started to want to emulate what was given to me in my mothering. And so I kind of, after some time, thought, oh, well, I could support women in mothering because this was so amazing for me. And so many women, it was just and it really set the scene for me that actually doesn't take much to support a woman in her breastfeeding and her mothering. It's just some lovely light suggestions and some great modeling. And I thought, wow, who doesn't want that? And so I thought, well, I can do this. So that's where I sort of started my entering the portal. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. And I started my my studies into how to be a postpartum doula and started volunteering in my town with an organization that sort of worked with birthing women and postpartum, and really started to take off in that area of, really finding my groove. And women would approach me about birth and I was such a hell no. I was just like, I was still so angry and still so hurt. And I knew there was no way in hell I could be appropriate. And yeah, that was really, really clear to me. It was really clear to me that if I entered that arena, I would not add value. And even though I had a lot of knowledge by this, so I mean, through all of this, I was learning and I was reflecting and I was starting to understand everything that happened to me because I really had questions a lot. I mean, a couple of months postpartum, I started to be like, okay, no, it's not true what they told me. But how do I figure this out? And so I started to obsessively figure out each thing I could remember through my birth and why that might have been a problem and why that was a lie and blah, blah, blah. And I really put the picture together about what really happened to me and why. And I had so much anger at myself, at them, mostly at them, because I didn't want to be responsible. And then through my studies to do my postpartum work was when I was asked to do this reflective piece and to look at my own birth and my own decisions. And as I said, I hated it. I hated it. It's really hard to be responsible. So it was quite interesting because when I finally came around to finishing that writing and doing it with an open heart and taking that responsibility for myself and really seeing what was being asked of me, someone asked me to come to their birth. And for the first time, that hard no wasn't there. I had a real curiosity. I was like, how come I don't feel like this is a no? And so I rang my friend who had been through all of this with me and I said, why don't I attend births again? And she was like, I don't know, like just attend births, would you? And I was like, yeah, this is really weird. It's like, I actually want to work with this woman. And I had not wanted that before, but it's so interesting to me that this all happened at the same time. Like, of course I could, because I was in full responsibility now. And so that is sometimes what frightens me when birth workers are drawn to saving women from what they had happened to them. There was going to be a big difference between the way I turned up in a birth full of trauma and hate for the system. I mean, I don't love the system now, but I have real clarity around the system. So yeah, it felt really different to me when I took this, this woman up on her invitation, and then I was flooded. I kind of put out there that I was going to start maybe, and then it was just like, boom. I just had women asking me to be there for them. And that was really interesting. And I remember lots of the births were really tricky births. They were women that, I remember it was like someone stayed pregnant for 43 weeks and someone birthed after 2 cesareans, and all these other women were choosing home births for their first babies. And it was kind of like, I was so into like, yeah, look at the difference that I'm making in these women's lives. And, I'm sure I was making a difference, but I was really caught up in probably what I would call the empowerment biz, of this idea that, yeah, I was giving them something. And I'm sure I was. But then there was a whole bunch of women, I've talked about this on other podcasts too, in other interviews, but then there was a whole bunch of women who I couldn't help, that absolutely became victim to the system, even though they'd hired a doula. And even though they had me there, and I didn't know how to solve their problems. And I just decided that was a challenge that I was going to take on, and I was going to figure out how I didn't save these women from the births that they had in the hospital, because I was amazing. I knew all this stuff. I mean, it was like, I admit this because I think this is important self-work for any birth worker, to really reflect on their behaviors, how they see themselves. And I mean, you know what? All my clients from them, when they hear me say this stuff, they all come and they're like, no, you're amazing. And I was like, thank you. I'm really glad I was helpful to you. But you know what? You should, because then there's the other women who don't speak to me because they're hurt. They're so hurt by, they thought they did all the right things. They hired this woman who could create magic in their births, but I couldn't. But I thought I could. I still thought I could. I thought I just didn't know enough. And so, gosh, I was like on this constant journey of like, how can you get a posterior baby with ruptured membranes to turn and birth and blah, 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 blah. And, there were no answers because, well, there is an answer. The answer is the system can't support those births. And you know what? And the answer is it wasn't me. Yes, I supported women to say no when they wanted to say no, but it only worked sometimes. And maybe that was that their births were swift in the end, or they had a lovely midwife who held back the other care providers from the room, and I wasn't nothing in those. I was a great support person, but I really felt, as I learned, that I was doing it wrong.
Sounds like you sort of felt like you were responsible for their outcomes.
Absolutely thought I was responsible. And there is an implication that doulas are responsible, because we are, doulas are told, or women are told, that doulas will, that evidence shows, we reduce this by this much percent and reduce this by this much percent, and I'm kind of like, but except when we don't. And actually, sure, the education helps, And, a lot of the, like a lot of the stuff I was talking about in my birth, I certainly helped, women could understand what those interventions were. But I think I had a vested interest in them then avoiding those interventions versus these are the interventions. This is what they can mean. Choose them or don't choose them. That's up to you. What will it mean if you choose them? What will it mean if you don't choose them? What will it mean if you choose them in this environment or this in this situation and not, like when my epidural came, brought in for me. I mean, I certainly said yes. But in that environment, in that particular situation, bring on that epidural because, artificial oxytocin is brutal and awful. And in my case. Basically I was carrying the responsibility of all these births and especially the ones that didn't work out like the women wanted. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And I just remember crying and crying and crying. And it was like this little voice in my head. It said what you just said to me before. You're not responsible. Like, it was so interesting. And it was weird. It was like, what? Like, you're not responsible for this. And then a little bit of like, and who do you think you are that you're responsible for this? And I just it was weird. It was so weird. I just kind of had this lightness come over me. And I didn't really know what to do with it at that stage, but it was like, okay, you need to look at this through a different lens. And I reckon, I only worked like that for a couple of years before it all became very clear to me.
Yeah.
But that was enough to bring me to my knees. I couldn't do it. And I think there's a massive burnout for doulas as well.
Absolutely. I wonder if you would speak to like the transition that you made into supporting women in a different way and what that looks like for you.
For me, a lot of my change is just really organic. And as I always say, it's very slow. I felt really alone in this because then I started to be sort of thinking, okay, if I'm not responsible, what does this look like? I think I need to have different conversations with women. And I didn't see that happening in a lot of places with other doulas. And I felt really alone. I mean, it was happening. I couldn't see it happening.
Yes. I mean, I can relate to that as well. That's sort of how I felt. Like I knew, like I've been a birth worker for, 10 years, attended births as a birth assistant, yada, yada, had my own births, knew I wanted to support women, but also did not want to do it in the typical like doula way, that was not my path. And that was part of coming across your voice and your work and the way that you serve women. And that helped me to be like, oh, that is more aligned with the ways that I want to support women.
Yeah. And, I find, and that first interview that you heard me on the Free Birth Society podcast, that was excruciating to reveal. I mean, I'm much more comfortable. I mean, I guess that's about a year ago. I'm much more comfortable totally airing what I think are huge mistakes that I've made for women. And I'm very regretful. But I think, it's important that other birth workers who, like you, are kind of like, oh, like that's why it doesn't feel right. I want to expose that learning in myself. And so, it just really happened organically. Then I was like, okay, well, it doesn't matter what other people are doing, I'm going to do it. And about that time, I decided to do some business coaching. And what I didn't realize about that business coaching, that it was the foundation of it was actually in personal coaching around our blocks and how we see ourselves and what our conditioning is and the stories we have about using our voice and speaking out and even how we feel about money and all of those things. And that was probably the first real time anyone had asked me to examine myself. Whew. So learning a lot of my behaviors and my reactions to things were just based on childhood experiences was, oh my gosh, it was, and of course now, like, that's just how, like, I talk every day. But back then it was like, what do you mean I'm not in like full control of like the way I respond to things? Like, what do you mean I'm acting like I'm 10 years old? Like, and so, oh, that was big. And I just cannot tell you how grateful I am that even that it was packaged up in a way that, like, oh, come here and learn about how to, structure your business better, or whatever it was that she was saying. And he actually let me just teach you about yourself and ask you to sort of delve. And that was the beginning for the self-work for me. And then as soon as I learned to see it in myself, I saw it in women everywhere. I was like, oh, none of us are really making these decisions in a way we think we are. We are so responding to our old stories, our old conditioning. And so I just started introducing what I had learned and those questions I had asked myself, I started to ask women, and it was glorious. It was glorious. Because actually women are just so freaking amazing. They've got all their own answers inside. When we are asked the questions of ourselves, we can figure it out. And so I realized that I didn't need to guide women anywhere. And all I had to be was this space to question and ask why and see what lies beneath that. And then it's just grown and grown and grown. And I've done more and more work on myself and learnt more and more things. And I think that you can never stop learning. So, every time I do a different course, I'll be like, no, how can I not seen that before? Or, I'll listen to a book, or, so I'm always doing this. And then, I have like regular calls with my community every couple of weeks, and I'll be like, so I just discovered this about myself. Does anyone else find this? And then all the women will be like, oh my gosh, and then we'll collectively be learning together. And I just find it brilliant. Brilliant. And of course, I have such a belief in birth as well. So I guess, and women's ability to mother their babies and care for themselves. And so I just kind of combine all of that together. In a very messy way. I'm a messy worker. Like, women come to me and I'm like, I don't know what we're going to discuss today. Just like this podcast. Oh my God, look at me, like crying my eyes out. Like, it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to show up as me, messy, imperfectly.
Yes. It's the most beautiful thing ever.
Like, kind of embarrassed half the time, and also just, like, I just love, like, life is love. I'm growing up a little 10-year-old. She's like brilliant and infuriating at the same time. And, it's wonderful. She teaches me every day, and yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, Amana, what you going to do with me?
Oh, I love it. I love how yes, just the work that you do with women, it's not just, it is around birth and mothering, but you help them to gain knowledge, not just knowledge about birth and mothering and the process, but also to like unearth this knowing of themselves. And I think that is so important and beautiful and wise.
Oh, thank you. Every time I talk to a woman, I just figure out she already knows in herself. And we're so unsupported in just knowing ourselves and trusting that and moving with it. And so that is all I actually really try and provide, which seems really simple, but actually it's really hard.
Absolutely.
Because of course, you know what? It's not like I don't battle. I could just tell her what to do right now. I could just tell her that's the answer. But that's my answer, not her answer. And so, I am constantly keeping a check of myself. you know, and even sometimes I will follow up with a woman and be like, I think I asserted my own thoughts on you, and I just want to like make sure you know that that's my junk, you know, and I'm not afraid to do that because I'm not perfect. And so, I had a wonderful conversation with a client the other day. She came back to me for a second birth, and we talked for a long time about the decision she knew she wanted to make, but she wasn't sure why she wanted to make it. And she just really wanted to chew the fat with me to kind of unearth the reasons why she wanted to. And I said to her, I really want you to make the other decision. I just have to like out that. Like I do, but I don't, because I actually, of course, want you to choose whatever is right for you. But I just have to say that out loud so you know I've got junk, and then we'll go. And she just burst out laughing. She was like, God, I love you, and then at the end of the conversation, I was like, I absolutely don't want you to do that thing that I wanted you to do. I really want you, like, I'm so glad I said that, because now I can really feel that it wasn't true and it wasn't real. And it was just a story, an old story of mine that thinks I know better, or I want what I think is better for you, but it's not true.
Right.
And she, because she knows me, like they all get to know me pretty well, the people who work with me, and she didn't care because she was like, I ultimately know you want what I want for me, and I was like, yeah, it's true. So and it turns out she had a deep instinctual knowing of that decision that didn't reveal itself until much later. And I'm so glad she listened to her voice and trusted it, because it was a pretty big deal that she made this very weird decision that she had not planned on making. So, trusting women to know for themselves, even if it looks like something that you think they don't want, like, it's just, you don't know. Only she knows. And when I get those lessons, I'm so grateful. So, because it keeps me in my space of just trusting women know best for themselves.
Yes, I love the relatability of that, and then just recognition that, yes, we're imperfect beings. And I know, like, a few weeks ago, I was voice messaging back and forth with the mama. I love voice messaging, but I'd like sent her one voice message sort of sharing she asked for my like personal perspective on it. And so I did, but then I also like, but this is me, and like had to follow up with a voice message after being like, and just to clarify, that was like just my own perspective, and I totally trust you to make your own decisions about what just so I can relate to that too.
And and I kind of, it's so interesting how you can replay the conversations later and actually hear where that's happened, where you brought your own stuff in. And I think it's really important that we're humble enough to own that with the women we work with, so they can trust us even more. I remember hearing a woman, I was at a birth, and it was a tricky scenario. And in the end, there was some pressure on her to accept a particular intervention for her own good. I can see exactly why in that scenario it was recommended, in the big picture kind of being in a hospital with all certain things going on. It becomes like a less about the one thing and much more about a big picture it can do. But when she was relaying that to me later after her birth, I actually and vocally like said it to her like that. Oh, but this is why, and this is, and the reason is this, and I went home and I was like, did you just fucking dismiss that woman's experience because you wanted to give her a big picture? I was sick. I rang up straight away, and I got her husband actually, and I was like, where is she? And he was like, oh, she's off doing this. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so you have to relay this to her immediately, that I am gross and that I did this thing, and that you need to tell her that that was not okay, and I'm very sorry, and it's bullshit. And he was like, I will tell her. And then she texted me later and she was like, oh, you're so funny. It's, you know, but I was like, yes, you forgive me, but only because I outed myself. Otherwise, I'm sure that she would have gone on for years being like, jerk. Like, you know, she forgave me because I owned how gross that was. But of course, we often want to defend our actions, even when we make mistakes. Because when you're in an environment of a hospital birth and there's so much going on and you're trying to be 10 steps ahead of all of, you know, what's coming down the pipeline that you're so experienced in knowing, it can get really tricky. But there's no place for defending ourselves. There is only a place for listening. And, you know, and again, I can't always be perfect with that. Which actually led me to decide to also, like, not that particular incident, but it was part of it, is that I also stopped attending births in any way linked into medical care. So I still attend births where women birth without medical care. I am not medical. But yeah, I just stopped attending births, and that was enormous and huge and fantastic. That was the best decision in my work ever. And it actually released me from the trickiness of needing to be liked by care providers. And actually, that's not for me to be liked. That is for the safety of the women when I go in, because if care providers don't like me, they can punish women. Oh. And so it was so I would always have to almost walk the line of self-betrayal. And I thought I was okay with that. I'd made a lot of conversations with myself around that. And then I just made this decision one day. I don't even know how I did, but I think it all just lined up. I think I had a number of unassisted births that I was attending. I had started to offer birth support without attendance, and a couple of people had taken me up on that, which I was surprised by, but very happy about. And yeah, then it all just lined up that I suddenly had no births in the system, and like no clients where I was planning. And I was like, this is your window. Like, right now, you can make this leap. And it was terrifying. It was actually terrifying, because I was like, oh, what if no one works with me? And, you know, what but it didn't even matter. I knew in my gut, something I'd been working on, listening to a lot more. Yeah, and I did it. I took the leap, and I stopped attending any births in the system and taking on. I will still work with women who are planning to birth in the system or figuring out what sort of birth they want, but I won't go there anymore. It's not right for me. And yeah, actually what it's opened up is just all of this amazing, what you were asking me before, like, how did I get into it? It just really was organic. It's women showed me what they wanted. Women started asking for just sessions with me, like previous clients, to just talk about things in their life. They felt like I was always a space that they could do that previously, and could I do it just for their life? And what a gift. And I was like, oh, hang on, what if I did this? And so I started doing that. And now actually I'm working with lots of clients who've worked with me before, and I love voice messaging too. So, you know, I have lots of programs now where women just, I'm available to talk to every day. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But yeah, I just, it's like they have me in their back pocket. So I just get to touch base with all these glorious women, like, nearly every day. And it's not work for me. It's just, I mean, I get paid for it. How amazing is that? But I just love it.
How wonderful. Yes, I know I have found much value in my time with you as well.
Thank you.
Before we sort of wrap up, I'm wondering if we could speak a little bit about the culture of the way our culture focuses so much on the baby and that the baby is alive and that the baby comes through, and not like where the women become invisible. In another podcast, you spoke about, does a birthing woman lose her value, or like, does a baby then lose her value when she becomes a birthing woman someday? Like, why is there so much value placed on the baby and not on the woman in the process?
Oh, it's a hot button topic. As soon as you said it, I got all ragey. I was like, oh no, I let that rage go. But you know what makes me really angry, because like, what even is this? What? How does our society so devalue girls, women, that at this most incredible time where we're creating and growing whole new human beings, we become nothing? It's madness. And I mean, we could point to a whole bunch of cultural reasons how we actually reinforce that, even in the birth world, like surrogacy and, where we treat women as incubators and not as valuable human beings. But I think it really, really starts with this idea in pregnancy that somehow women are loose cannons who don't know themselves or know their babies, and that all of these other people care so much more about their baby than the woman possibly could. And I mean, and I would sort of say that some of the most powerful statement, and I get a bit, I always go, am I being boring saying this? But I pretty much always say it to all my clients, because, we always get to the point where like they don't know they're confused about the decisions that they want to make and the decisions that they're being told that they should make. Mm-hmm. And I would just say, or ask them, like, do they think it's possible that this stranger in their prenatal care could possibly care more about their baby than they do? Like, could you possibly believe that for a second? Like, do you think when that doctor or midwife's head hits the pillow at night, if they give a second thought to your baby, that they have coerced, threatened, and done a whole bunch of things in an appointment to get you to agree to something? Like, is there any care? I mean, the answer is just so repulsively obvious. And I mean, I'm like, when my head hits the pillow, I actually think about all of the women I work with. I really care about you. And I'm going to tell you, I don't care about your baby. And I'll tell you why. I don't need to care about your baby, because you got it covered. So from the very beginning, that's actually, even with all of my mistakes and all of my kind of misplaced, guidance, that, I mean, it was still loving and caring, and I did want the best for women. But I mean, I don't know, is that any different? I don't know. Anyway, that was always a really, really strong message I would give my clients, because they were making what was considered by the system very dangerous decisions. And so we would have to talk about, why were they making this decision? Were they not? And ultimately, I mean, going controversial, but women can make any decision they want, even if it is dangerous for their baby. If it is actually dangerous for their baby, it is still that woman's right to make that decision when that baby is inside of her. She is an autonomous being. Do I think women make those dangerous decisions? No, but they could. And that would still be her right. And that trumps everything for me. And it really did, in the end, become, when I got that whisper of, you're not responsible, it actually opened up, not just you're not responsible for women having the natural births they want, but actually you're not responsible for any decision that they make. And so if women, it actually changed everything for me, because, I mean, not that I really kept statistics about the sort of outcomes from birth, but I had a good idea of what was happening. I started noticing when women made decisions for themselves, there was actually a lot more interventions involved. And so I just truly believed women could make whatever decisions they wanted for themselves, and I didn't need to guide them out of that. And it's because we make decisions based on such a myriad of reasons, you know, fears, personal experiences, stories of people around us, the conditioning. And women have the right to make those decisions because they ultimately make decisions that, for whatever's going on in their life in that moment, makes them feel safe. Even if in reality, that intervention doesn't end in the safest things for babies or themselves or whatever. None of that matters to me anymore. So actually I moved away from, I quite like this word, like the dogma of this is best for babies or this is best for women, to, you know what? How about I just hold space for women to figure it out for themselves? And sometimes those choices were hard choices that women regretted later, but they did actually make them in their full own autonomous choice in that moment, in the place. And so did I in my birth,
Right.
because I chose to stay. I made those decisions because maybe I didn't make the decision about a finger in my cervix. And I will call that abuse and assault and rape.
Yeah. Yes.
But I knew that it was wrong to be there. And I still chose it. So that was my autonomous decision-making, to choose to be there. And so I get to make those choices as a woman for the good or the bad, until I learn something that teaches me a different choice to make. So when we amplify women and make women more visible, and actually what happens when we do that is we ask women what they want, and then we can get underneath what they're asking. Just because they say they want something doesn't mean we can't kind of tease that out. And then we find they might make other decisions. But this all starts if we believe women can make the choices for themselves. And we can only do that if we see women, and we see women as the most valuable person in pregnancy and birth.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
But gosh, that was hard to come to, because I thought I wanted every woman to have a certain birth, because they told me they wanted to have that certain birth.
Right.
So, you know, there's a lot of nuance around this, I think. And it's a lot of, you know, challenging self-talk is required to truly see women.
Absolutely. Oh, well, for all the women that would love to work with you, where all can they find you?
I hang out on my Instagram, saying things, sometimes terrified to say things, but mostly deciding to say them anyway. I am Earthside with Leisa Masters, and my website is earthsidebirthservices.com.au. I had to like really search for that just then. I was off in another little land of thoughts. And
your podcast?
Oh yeah, thank you. Earthside with Leisa Masters. I ask women to tell their stories and share their transformations, and I think they're pretty epic stories.
Absolutely. I've listened to them all. I love them. Yes.
I'm supposed to be getting out another one soon. It's been a long time between drinks, but there's been a few things in life. But I am currently editing a pretty amazing story of a lot of what we're talking about, of a woman releasing what she thought she should choose to really figuring out what was right for her. And it's pretty good.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to listening to that. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing your stories and wisdom with the world.
Thank you so much, Amana. Love talking to you.
You too.